Welcome. Good morning to the Sober Heathen podcast. I'm the Sober Heathen. I'm Scott. Very excited for today. Um Reading this content looks like it's going to be another great guest. You know, things are kind of crazy, but to be able to sit down and talk recovery with somebody that gets it and wants to tell a story and wants to help other people is super rejuvenating. Um, right now the woman that raised me is in the hospital. That'd be my great grandmother. So things have been kind of hectic the last few days, going on just a few hours sleep. But man, reading this and getting pumped up for a podcast to talk recovery and maybe hopefully help somebody one day. That's the shot in the arm that I needed this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in my guest, Dr. Dallas Bragg. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So go ahead and hit us with whatever you want to tell us a little bit about your background or your story with addiction, as much or little detail as you want.
Yeah. Okay. Well, not to go back too far, but I grew up in West Virginia, and I had a strange mix of parents. So I had a severely alcoholic, traumatized father, and the family there was what I would get like the heathens, as you. But very much rough, drinkers, fighters, redneck. And I had the other side, which was very conservative Pentecostal mom. And so my dad went into the military early, and we headed off to some of the East Coast of North Carolina. And I didn't see him very often, but when I did, I, as early as I can remember, heard a lot of comments from him about how different I was from him. And so then there were comments about, you couldn't be my real son. Something must have happened. There was a mix up, that kind of thing, because I wasn't a heathen and I was with my mom a lot. So, I was there. She was taking us to church, and I kind of adhered to that way. And then, so anyway, those things came about and caused what I call now is an exclusion schema, in terms of I felt excluded from my own family, from my own father. And then not only that was my mom would catch me early on, kind of, I was on a stage and I was performing, pretending as a child. And she busted in and was like, just severely persecuting me about, you don't act like that. That's not how boys are, and that kind of thing. And so the early messages for me was that if I were to reveal my true nature and my true self, that it's not right, it's abnormal, and I don't belong.
Sure.
So things went on with that. And so in that lens, that framework that I had, the rest of my life lined up to that, right? So I started finding out all the ways that I didn't belong. It was either school dances or getting picked last in sports or whatever it was. I found ways to back up and prove that I didn't belong, and I would escalate that. And so I grew up very socially awkward, hating myself, all those kind of things, and always seeking the approval of a man. And so there's a lot of people in the homosexual community who will at me for saying that. But a lot of my tendencies toward men came from the fact that I never had approval from my father. And maybe I had a propensity to be gay in the first place. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but I was always trying my best to get something from him, some kind of validation. And so that went on into my adulthood. And at 18, I got married to a woman. And that was my way of kind of feeling safe, because I was going out into the world and I couldn't be myself. So I had to play along with the church, and I also believed that I had a demon, so it was always seeking ways to get this demon exorcised from me, so that I would, completely like women and stop looking at, stop looking at men. So anyway, so that I dove into a marriage and kids and lost myself, but my self-worth was coming from giving everything to them, and I became an enabler. Eventually I became suicidal. I went into a mental hospital for a while, and that's when I finally started to tell people that I was having homosexual tendencies, as they call them in the church. And so we started to try to pray that away. It didn't work. So anyway, so I ended up coming out at late. So I was 35 when I came out. Left my family, left my wife. Had the kids every other weekend. But that's when I thought I could finally be myself. This is my chance to let everything out and be who I am. And all I knew about gays were Will and Grace and what I saw in the news in terms of the pride parades, right? So in my mind, being gay was like a pride parade. There was rainbows and glitter and celebration and all that stuff. And I had a rude awakening when I came into that world, because again, so I could have had a different experience coming out if I still didn't believe that I could be myself. I still didn't believe that I was always going to be left out. I was always going to be excluded. Everyone's going to not like me. And so I had that experience. It was very clicky. It was very prove yourself first. There was comments about what I was wearing. Then I started getting feedback from other men that I was too effeminate. And I was like, wait a minute, I've been hiding my effeminate nature all my life, and now I can't be effeminate either still in the gay world. What is going in there? And so I went into this spiral emotionally of, where am I ever going to feel right and accepted in myself? And so that's when I discovered crystal meth. And crystal meth is rampant in the gay community. It's kind of an undercover, hiding in plain sight drug. I mean, it's everywhere all the time. And there's an app. It's a hookup app for gays. It's Grindr. And basically with Grindr, you can see any gay man within any range. Like, he could be a mile away, 2 miles away, 3 feet away, but it's a radar. And at any time you can get on there and find crystal meth and parties of men doing crystal meth, and it's all sexual. So anyway, I ended up getting into that crowd because it finally felt like I belonged somewhere, but I didn't realize I had money. I had money. At the time I had received my doctorate. I was teaching MBA courses. I was working for a law school. I was making 6 figures. And this kind of, I remember thinking the first time I did it, wow, I finally found myself.
Yeah.
That you could be sexually free. It didn't matter what you acted like. It was all just, you were sex zombies, and, all these hot guys were into me. And so it was like, I finally got it. And I dove into that head first. And not probably, but within 3 years, I had been fired. I had been arrested for meth possession 4 times. I had lost my house, been evicted, and lost my car, of course. And I was using IV. I was shooting up like 3 or 4 times a day, and with some people. So when I was the house, headquarters for this group of guys. And when I got evicted, then I got thrown out of the group, and I was homeless, and was kind of just existing under this tree and trying to get out and steal what I could to get money and that kind of thing. And finally, I had no strength, no money, no drugs, and no friends. And so that's when I ended up finally breaking down and calling my mom. And luckily, she came and got me. And anyway, I had to give myself up to the police because there was an APB for my arrest. And I gave myself up. I went to jail and got entered into drug treatment court. And with drug treatment court, you drug tested like 4 or 5 times a week. You have to go to rehab. You have to show up and do meetings every day, and meetings with your counselor. And then I was also on probation, so I had meetings there. So it was basically a full-time job for about a year and a half. But it's totally worth it if you can do it, because all my charges were dismissed. They paid for them to be expunged. And so in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, somehow, when the courts weren't in session, I got a letter saying, you're free, you're done, all your charges are expunged.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so the last time I was in last time I was in jail, no one would answer my call because, it was my fourth time. And the only people that finally would was my daughter. So she was 16 at the time, I guess. She and my son, who was 14, came and picked me up. And it was the middle of summer. We went to a park. And during all this time, my ex-wife also became an alcoholic.
Oh,
And
geez.
so they actually were on their own and in an apartment, and they were like, we need a parent. And you need to make a decision here. And so I did. And that was August 4th, 2018. And that was
Wow.
my decision to get free from crystal meth. And I did, I went through the motions, to be honest with you, for that 18 months.
Sure.
I had to be sober, but it cleared my head enough that I got into, I didn't resonate with the 12 steps. Just didn't jive with it. I had to go because I had to, but I got into a spiritual community. And I discovered plant medicine, which is actually where my sobriety took a sharp turn, and was able to not to be free from crystal meth. And now, I've turned back after 5.5 years of being sober from crystal meth, able to turn back and be sobriety coach for other gay men who are trapped in this crystal meth
Sure.
epidemic. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, man, for sharing that. That's great. And I'm glad you're doing what you're able to do now. It's Lindsay's clapping over here in the comments. Um, no, it's for different reasons, but they're kind of similar. I've said it before too. My parents weren't around. I was raised by my great grandmother, so they would show up or they wouldn't show up. They'd say they'd show up and they didn't show up. So I kind of had issues with that too. Like, why don't they want me? And kind of reading through your stuff too, it's like from the ages 1 to 7 you learn a lot, and that's what a lot of things were going on from 1 to 7 for me. And then I found alcohol, and all of a sudden I could talk to the pretty girls. I could talk, I was fitting in, and alcohol gave me everything that I was missing, all those things, or it filled the voids and I didn't have to feel the pain. So I can relate to that quite a bit, man. I can really relate to that. So man, so much to unpack. So the 12 steps. So what got you? You got your doctorate. What?
Yeah. So I got my doctorate in executive leadership, and I wanted to go into nonprofits. So, and I did. I went into the nonprofit world after I got sober for a while, and I was helping homeless veterans find housing and jobs and things like that.
Awesome.
And that was in honor of my dad. So, I grew up with such anger and resentment toward my dad. And he was a severe alcoholic, physically abusive, emotionally abusive, and I thought sexually abusive, which is a whole other rabbit hole,
Sure.
in terms of how we remember incorrectly.
Sure.
Most of our memories are not reality. Most of our memories are seen through the lens of whatever this belief is in the back of our mind. And so I had a fantasy memory so that I could somehow blame him for the way that I was. Plant medicine actually helped me see that memory as it really happened.
Really?
Yeah. And it collapsed a whole story, because I latched on to this story, this victim story of, yes, my dad molested me, blah, 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 but he didn't. And so when this came about and I realized that I was trying to latch onto this victim mentality and latch my blame onto him, it collapsed that story and set me free from it. And then I was able to move forward with my own sobriety. So the other thing about that is, all this time growing up, I always said, what kind of father would ever treat his children the way he did? What kind of father would put alcohol first? What kind of father would, take me camping, but get drunk and pass out by the fire? And then fast forward to me as a meth addict, rushing my kids to bed so I could have a sex party.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yep. And I realized in this, when I started getting sober, I was like, I'm going to make amends, with my father. He was dead. He had passed on. I'm going to make amends with him. And then I started realizing, like, you are him. Like, you you did the exact same thing. And then this whole another storyline collapsed. And this story that I had latched onto, that he was a horrible father, disappeared. And I developed compassion, compassion that it wasn't him, it was his addiction. It wasn't him, it was his trauma. And I was able to actually see him for his true self, which is his soul self, not this version that had been, when I found out more about how he grew up too, it made sense. But this version of him that was so heavily soiled with trauma that he really was just making decisions out of addiction. And it just helped me not only just make amends, but it helped me cut this cord of energy that was going toward him, this hatred, this anger, and that made room for more self-love for me.
Wow, man. Like, dude, I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking about my, one of my core issues that I've tried to address is my mother.
Mm.
And I always said I was never going to be like her. I was going to be like, I was going to have my kids, I was going to be a great dad. Well, I didn't see my kids in person for 2 years because of my alcoholism. They didn't want to even talk to me on the phone, and they're 11 now. And that was between 9 and 10, and what you just said about your father and that look, that introspective look of, I am kind of my mother. And, how can I hold these grudges against her when it is her trauma? It is her addiction that is causing a lot of these things. Dude, man, shit. This is a little heavier than what I thought it was going to be, but that's great stuff, man. I mean, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
That's really good introspective look at it.
Yeah. And it's paradigm shifts. It's perspective shifts. All spiritual growth, any kind of growth, mental, spiritual, emotional, is just perspective shifts. And so in shifting that perspective of him, I went back and all my memories were new because I saw it as him reacting from his trauma and stopped taking it personally because nothing was personal. Nothing.
Fuck.
Yeah. Nothing in life is personal.
Sure.
So
yeah. Well, there's something else that you said that I can relate to as well. I grew up because of my mother, a story my mother told me, and little memories that may or may not be true of being molested by one of my many stepfathers. And that really fucked with me too. And then come to find out within the last year or two talking to my mom, it was never him. It was apparently his sister. I don't remember any of that, but I can't remember any of it, period. I just know what I was doing as a young child that only teenagers do. I'll just say that and leave it at that. You know what I mean? Like, there are signs, and I've been told by psychiatrists and stuff it probably happened. But anyway, it's it's really interesting about making up the memories, to kind of fulfill, to give explanation, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And seeing them through this lens of whatever your belief is. Like, for mine is I will never be accepted was my belief, and whatever it is, it's some version, as you know, all addicts have some version of I am not enough.
Sure.
Or whatever that is. I am not pretty enough, or I'm not smart enough. I'm not whatever enough. And I was just, I'm not enough. And so I'll never be, my true self is not enough, and I'll never be accepted for who I am. And so if you can invert that, to I am wonderful the way I am, and then look back at your memories, but also look forward to see, then everything kind of changes, so for me, I noticed, we were talking about triggers earlier or emotional activations.
Yeah.
I started to notice that even not getting an email or a text back, would feel like a knife in my gut. And I would spiral emotionally. And people would say, you're insecure, you're too sensitive, blah, blah, blah. But when I dug into that, meditated on it, went to the plant medicine, and really focused on what emotion was in my body when I didn't get that text back, tune into that emotion and ask myself, when did I feel that the first time? When I felt it the first time, it would take me to some situation, some situation with my dad, always, of vying for his attention, but not getting it. And that's what really was bothering me. It's not that person and not that text. So I had to really go in and heal that. And collapsing those timelines and collapsing those stories helped me to see that, when I didn't get a text back, it doesn't bother me anymore, because I know it's not personal, for one thing, but it doesn't evoke that same emotion either.
Right on. Yeah. Well, and so you talked a little bit about in one of the readings. I was trying to find it so I could quote it, but you talk about thinking versus emotional, and from what I read from it, you're talking, dive into the feelings and how those are affecting you. I was in treatment. I was kind of on another mindset. Like, if I could remove my emotions, well, first of all, I wouldn't be human, and that would suck. But imagine all the great decisions I would have made, if I could just use my thoughts and eliminate the emotions. So yeah, addressing those emotions. Talk a little bit about the difference between thinking and emotions.
Yeah. Okay. So typically the mind is here for us to reason. It's kind of if you could, I don't know how woo woo you want to get, but it's a 3D function for us as sleepwalking earthlings, to use your mind to reason things. What should I eat today, or whatever. And so you can't think your way out of a trauma, and you can't think your way out of being sober, of it being sober either, because it's a baseline reptilian function. But what we're moving into as a society, as a collective, is getting in touch with what our bodies are telling us. Emotion, the heart. The heart is actually the center of the body. I mean, if you know anything about heart math, if you can get your heart feeling safe, then it regulates the rest of the body. The brain actually listens to the heart. The brain isn't even in control of the body. The heart's in control of the brain, who's in control of the body. So what I mean by that too is just not only feeling into the emotion, but allowing it. And this is what it was a huge healer for me, was when I felt anger. There's a messages out here in the sobriety recovery community and the spiritual community, to when you feel angry or you feel down, go straight to gratitude. Yeah, but look at the house I live in, or I'm sober, and just start thinking of all the things you appreciate, and that's all fine and good, but not when it's bypassing, letting that emotion run its course. And I see it as a wave cresting and leaving. And so when you feel angry at somebody, is just stop and let it happen, and feed it, like intensify it.
Yeah.
Like I'll dive into it. Yes, I'm effing angry at this person. They did this, they did this. Like, I will feed it and let it go. And it rises up. Sometimes I'm crying. I was at a restaurant. This was actually not even long ago. I was at a restaurant and I got a text that triggered me. And I just sat there and I felt it, and I was crying, and it was just shaking. And then it crests, it rises, and then it leaves.
Yeah.
But the emotions are supposed to do that. We aren't supposed to suppress them, right? Because if you do, they're just going to come back stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yes.
It's like putting them under a pressurizer. That's the part that I don't think we're taught to do. And it's not the main lesson. Is it's all about gratitude, feeling good, and appreciation, and that's great in its place. So in everything we do, we have to think about, what is the motivation of doing this, right? Like, if you send a text that is what. So I use the example of, I was in a group the other day, and this lady was crying. This other woman walked up to her and started hugging her, right? And so the two walk away from the situation, and I heard the feedback from both. The lady that hugged walked away from it feeling so good, because she had really done her duty. She had supported her, and her motivation was to make herself feel good.
Mm.
The other lady was offended. The other lady actually she got worse emotionally, because she doesn't like to be touched. Nobody asked her.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask, what is my motivation here? Because if my motivation is to make this woman feel better, I'm going to ask, how can I support you? I'm going to ask questions about what it is that she needs, instead of making an assumption and making myself feel good by hugging her.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Intent is everything, and that's what I try to tell people. Like, if you need to say this, if your intent is, you know, just and it's not selfish, then you should probably do it, right? And then you talked about, man, I want to go back to that too. You talk about feeling the feeling when you're feeling it. You know,
Yeah.
one thing that does, and I talk about it all the time, I journal. Like I will write down, I, I just, I would be okay with not being here at all today. You know, I don't want to die, but I don't want to live today. And I'll write that shit down. I
Mm.
have written now today, now since I've been in recovery and I'm learning more about this stuff and more about myself, I have written some really nasty texts that never got sent, but I've
Mm.
typed them fuckers out so that they're there, you know.
Yeah.
And I really believe that, you know, I'll type it out sometimes and I'll let it sit and I'll come back to it. But
Yeah.
I want to hammer home something here. I think because I think that because of what you're saying and what I've been through, ignoring those things by going right to gratitude and acceptance. And I just talked about acceptance yesterday. Now I kind of feel bad that I even brought it up now that we're having this conversation. But going right to gratitude and acceptance, you're pushing those things to the side, and those things they're gonna fester and they're gonna
Yeah.
grow. And that was my go-to. My great grandmother's in the hospital right now, and I don't know what the future holds for her. She's 99, so I mean she's made it a long ways.
Mm.
But she raised her kids, then my mother, and then me. She's done more than any human should have to do. So anyway, she's a great human. But her go-to when I was a kid, when my parents wouldn't show up after they said it, was, well, don't think about it. Go play with your toys. You know, go watch this. Go do this. Go do that. And so I learned to ignore those emotions and not address them all the way back then. And that is a trauma. That is a form of trauma.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to for people to understand that it's okay to feel a certain way, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're pissed off, that's okay. That's don't go beat somebody's ass just because you're pissed off, you know, but feel it and get it out there. Absolutely, man. I love what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. We just, in getting into the energy work that I do with my clients too, is, there's so much energy that is stored in our body, and it comes out in all kinds of different ways. And I follow Gabor Mate a lot, and
Yeah.
there's this book, The Body Says No, when the body says no, and he talks about the physical manifestation of some of this. So a lot of people have a hard time buying that, but it's actually scientifically proven, in that if we don't release these emotions, then they manifest in all kinds of other ways, physically and mentally. And a step that I had to take early in recovery too is, I was so hell bent on not being a victim, in the beginning, was like, I didn't want to be that victim, but I also had to come to realize that I was victimized. Like my father, whether it was trauma or whatever it was, took away my childhood. I mean, those comments, there's one
Yeah.
word, one sentence, "I don't think you're my real son,"
Yeah.
stuck with me. And that took away not only my childhood, but it colored and grayed out most of my life. And help, and so, but I didn't want to, I had to go back and mourn that, because, one definition of recovery is, getting back what was taken from you.
Sure.
My childhood was taken from me, and most of my life. And so I had to go back and mourn that. I had to, there's a difference between playing a victim and actually being victimized. And so I had to really balance that and go back and mourn that childhood and express that anger toward him too. That version of him.
Yeah. And you were able to do all this and express this and come to some sort of peace internally after he passed.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. After he passed, I did all kinds of different things.
Well,
I was
I just
saving
think it's important for people. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's important for people to realize that there is a chance for that to happen, you know, even at that point. I've heard it plenty of times.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's fine. No, it's okay. There's the process of forgiveness is about you anyway, right? So you don't need that person there. And so I just shifting my perspective of him, like I said before, was enabled me to come to terms with that, and just see him differently and talk to him differently now and talk about him differently. That's the thing too, is that
Right.
when I have conversations about him with my mom, my family, my friends, people, I always, my tone and the things that I say represent a different story, and that story represents a different identity. Like I present myself not as this poor child who, grew up being abused. I present myself as an overcomer,
Sure.
in that he was only doing the best that he could.
Right.
And that really, the way that you speak and present that is going to present a different identity for yourself.
Yeah.
And that sets you on a different course as well in your recovery.
Dude, truth. With capital T, man. It's not. It doesn't have to do with recovery per se, but I have an experience with that. With when my marriage ended, it wasn't the great. Maybe we probably weren't the best fit for each other, but we did create two wonderful boys, and now we co-parent pretty damn well. And I'm super proud of my ex-wife and the job she's done while I was going through all this crap. And she's never ever buried me or tried to bury me and take those kids away. And I respect her, and I wish her nothing but the best today. But what I used to do early on was I referred to her, and if she ever listens to this podcast, the secret's going to be out, but I referred to her as Satan. And it was always Satan. And so I kept creating this thing. And while I was doing that and while I felt that, our relationship was crap. It was always tense. It was always, I can now look back and even just having this conversation with you today, that I was creating that tense, that tense feeling because I was portraying her in a certain way. And that was, that's not fair. And now I've forgiven her, and, we text and we have, great conversations. So yeah, it's great stuff, man. Great stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the power, the thing about plant medicine for me that changed, and it comes back to that a little bit, is that it was the first time I realized that I'm connected to something else higher than me, but all the power is within me. And, that's not a message that you get, that I got in the church or the 12 step, is that you have to rely on something else.
Yes.
And honestly, it's all here, and mostly in your heart. It's all there in terms of how you see, how you articulate, the stories that you tell, the stories that you create. It all starts here and ends here. Now there are, I believe in powers outside of ourselves and a higher power and all that kind of thing. I believe in all of that, but when you become dependent on it, you're not in control of your life.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the same thing with me. They see they're two different entities, but they're saying the same thing, that you have no power and you'll never have that power. And I feel like, man, that's not coming from a good place on the inside. I have to have some sort of power. Like, I get some hardcore people from the AA field coming after me sometimes because I say I'm not powerless over alcohol anymore because I can walk past it in the store and let it sit there. It's not doing push-ups. That's the fantasy world, right? It's like, it's not going to get into my body unless I go over there and pick it up, which I would be then giving the power to myself to make that choice. It's still coming from me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
very true. That's very true. Yeah.
So so you got a website, talk about your website and what you offer if you want to, and then kind of plug that a little bit.
Okay. So I've been coaching for over a year now, and I've been every coach imaginable. It's always been sobriety of some sort. I was in empowerment, sobriety. I was this, I was that. And I've just, I've now narrowed my target market down to gay men who are struggling with addiction. All of my clients right now are struggling with crystal meth, because unless you're a gay man who have struggled with crystal meth, you're not going to understand where you're coming from.
Fair enough.
Same thing as anything else. So we're able to relate very quickly, and I'm able to know and zoom into exactly what they're going through. So I do offer coaching for addiction, but it's right now I'm focusing on the gay male crowd. I really want to get a light shined on what's happening with crystal meth, because crystal meth in the gay world is different than it has its own quality, as every drug does. but it has, like I said, there's an app. There's several apps you can use. You can find it anywhere in the country within an hour. There's parties going on always, anywhere. There's a Zoom channel, several Zoom channels where you go and you're using with other men around the world. So you can be doing that from your bedroom or wherever. There's Telegram channels. There's WhatsApp, all this stuff where you can go in, exchange pictures or do things live or find parties. And basically the drug zeroes in on men who have a high level of trauma, who are insecure, who, there's there's a big problem in the gay world, and I mentioned being ridiculed for being effeminate, with internalized homophobia. You're still not over not being able to be yourself, so you are scared to be seen with or get triggered by a man who acts like a woman. You want a man who acts like a man, because then people won't know, and it feels safer for you to be with a manly man. And so there's so many layers to all of that, and meth takes all of it away, right? And meth lets you explore this sexual side of yourself that you couldn't before, because before you would feel shameful about it. And so it just really zeroes in on those type of men, takes them and it helps them experience what they think is a world that is them. I have found myself finally, just like I said. And so my coaching program helps them see, again, what we do is talk about their emotional activations. I don't require them to be abstinent. I let them decide, what is it you want? Do you, what kind of situation is it? I'm, big on harm reduction at first, because I feel like it needs to happen in a series and a journey. Each relapse is we celebrate relapse because it's a learning experience. We break it down, we track it, we see what we do next, we tweak, and we move forward. It's not like, sorry, you have to get a new chip and start over and, march in front of the crowd and show everybody that, that you're a failure. I don't believe in any of that. And so we work through that. But really, it's what I'm getting my clients to understand is the answer to your addiction is found when somebody pulls out in front of you in traffic. And how do you react to that? Because if your nervous system is out of whack, you're going to react in this exaggerated way. So when you act when your emotions are activated in an exaggerated way to what is seemingly a small stimulus, that is an indication that there's energy stuck, but it's also an indication that there's a belief in there somewhere. Like with my kids not cleaning up in the very beginning, my kids wouldn't clean up after themselves, and I would go ballistic, kicking things and stuff. And I was like, afterwards, I was like, what is this about? And when I could go in, feel into the emotion, track it back, because the nervous system, the body doesn't classify anything in linear time. So it classifies in groups in emotion. So the emotion that I was feeling in that as a 40-year-old was the same emotion I felt as a 7-year-old. The body doesn't know the difference, right? The nervous system doesn't know. Anyway, so I figured out that extreme reaction was me feeling shame about not being a father, being a drug addict, and what I did to them, and blah blah blah. It would track back to I'm not enough, and so it had nothing to do with them. But anyway, so what we do is we very meticulously think about all their emotional activations. We track them back. We try to replace them with new beliefs. And, my goal is them to graduate from the program and not think about addiction and not identify with it. That was the thing of my past. That does not inform who I am. It informs who I am today, but it isn't who I am. Like, I don't have to say I'm an addict all the rest of my life. I struggled with addiction and I healed from it. Is my
the same as if you quit smoking, you're not a smoker forever, right?
Right.
We don't need to dwell in the past. Like I think you and I doing this, we're still talking about our addiction because we're trying to help people. But I think it's totally healthy for somebody to beat the shit and walk away and never talk about it again. That's totally that's a healthy living in my opinion. You know what I mean? If you're not trying to help people and you're just walking around, oh, I'm an alcoholic and I got 40 years
Right.
and I'm just coming here to drink the coffee. Sorry, I didn't want to.
No, yeah. I mean, one of the first meetings I went to, NA meetings, this lady it was a speaker meeting, and she talked about, being sober for 20 years. But then she went on to describe this saga of her life. It was just like always just triggered and wanting to use, and but at least I'm not drinking and drugging. It's all these fucking cliches that they throw out all the time that do no good. And I just left the meeting. I was like, is that my life? I have to struggle with this for the rest of my life. I have to think about meth every day.
No, they missed the part in the big book where it says alcohol is but a symptom, right? Yeah. So just taking away a symptom doesn't solve the problems. That's the part that a lot of people miss.
Yeah.
But dude, I think your message is awesome, man. So, if anybody listens to this that wants to reach out, are you just helping people locally, or do you have? I know you have a website or whatever.
Yes. My website is www.drdallasbragg.com. I've all my clients are virtual and they're around the world. Actually, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So anybody wants to, if you know of anyone or that is struggling. If you have a gay family member or gay friend who is struggling with addiction, it's probably crystal meth.
Well, I'm so glad that you came on, man, and you have this out there to help people, that might be feeling the same way you do. That's why we have to talk about this stuff, and we have to get our stories out there. Somebody has to, not everybody, because I know not everybody wants to share it, but those willing to do this is so important. So, I was just looking at the distribution numbers on my podcast, and I didn't even think about Apple Podcast, and there's people out there listening on Apple Podcasts. So hopefully somebody hears your message today that they either need the help or they know somebody that does, and maybe they can reach out to you and they can start to a better life, man. It really is a better life, and there is a chance to beat this shit, no matter who you are.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, man. I keep up posting the good content. This was a lot of fun. I like to keep these right around 40 minutes because I think that's people's attention span. And I think, man, I don't want to ruin it. This has been great. So thank you, Dr. Dallas Bragg, and please reach out if you need anything. If you're listening to this, reach out to him and see if he can help you. So
thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, this was awesome. Oh, I get to mark off North Carolina, right, on my map. So another push pin. Hell yeah. So, all right. Have a great day and a great weekend. And thanks for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.